Hi, my name is Viorel Popescu, and on behalf of my colleagues from University of Bucharest and Ohio University, I'll be talking about livestock depredation by brown bears in the Romanian Carpathians. The Romanian Carpathians harbor the largest brown bear population in Europe outside European Russia, and brown bear densities can vary widely. Nationwide densities were estimated at about 7 bears per 100 square kilometers. However, certain regions of the Romanian Carpathians can harbor very high densities of bears, up to 22.5 individuals per 100 square kilometers in some areas of the Southern Carpathians, with averages between 12, 14, 16 individuals. The brown bear population fluctuated greatly through time since the 1950s, when we started collecting the best data. And noteworthy dates here on this graph are 2007, when Romania joined the European Union, and also 2016, which is the last date on this graph, when the hunting ban was instated. In some of these areas with high brown bear densities, and not only, there are a lot of damages being reported, not just to livestock, which is the topic of this talk, but also to crops, beehives, orchard trees, and even property damages. So the goal of this paper was to map out and understand what are predictors of human brown bear conflict, particularly as it pertains to livestock kills and injuries, because these livestock injuries and damages are the most prominent and are more likely to be reported compared to other types of damages. So we used 756 incidents collected by 3 county environmental protection agencies between 2008 and 2016 across a gradient of rural to urban development. And this reportings varied greatly through time, with the highest reporting occurring in 2012, and the lowest in 2010, and the most reportings being related to cow damage. As such, we set up study hypotheses based on both our knowledge of the system as well as other studies of human bear conflict in other parts of the world. And it's particularly we hypothesized that heterogeneous landscapes composed of forests and agriculture and villages, and also where villages occur near the forest edge, would have a higher likelihood of human bear conflict. That forest cover in general at the landscape level or increased depredation level, because previous studies in our region show that mixed forests and coniferous forests are being selected for by brown bears throughout the year. And also, but that magnitude of the depredation level will depend on the type of livestock. Also, that higher brown bear abundance will lead to higher levels of human bear conflict, and that there'll be differences between cows and sheep in terms of their risk to being depredated or injured. For example, for cows, higher risk for predation nearby villages, and higher risk for sheep in high altitude pastures where they are grazed in the summertime and further from the villages. To do so, to understand what drives human bear conflict, we extracted variables from various data sets, including the Korean land cover, the proportion of agricultural land, forest, natural areas, and open areas, which includes pasture and grazing lands, which were calculated at different levels of the different spatial scales of 1, 5, and 10 square kilometers, as well as these predictors that we hypothesized would be important: distance to village, distance to forest, as well as the brown bear abundance, which again, this was considered relative because they are raw data collected from game managers, not adjusted for imperfect detection. We used generalized linear mixed models with year as a random effect, and with the presence of a livestock damage as a one, and randomly placed points all across the study area as zeros in order to characterize the background variation in the environment. We tested 32 models that also tested hypotheses about the influence of environmental and anthropogenic variables. And then based on a principal component analysis that we implemented, we decided to break the dataset in 3: cows, sheep, and other livestock, and ran different models for each species of livestock separately, because this PCA showed that there might be different factors affecting the presence or absence of human-bear conflict. And also in terms of land cover types, we did some preliminary investigations with percentages of land cover, different land cover types at 1, 5, and 10 square kilometers, and the 10 square kilometer scale always performed best. So we just used that moving forward. Jump straight into results here, and I'll show you 3 different graphs: one cows, sheep, and other livestock. The odds ratios and odds are on the x-axis, variables on the y-axis, values, odds ratios, and odds values to the left of the vertical dotted line, so less than 1, show negative predictors of livestock damage, and values greater than 1 to the right of the dotted vertical dotted line are positive predictors of damage. So we found that damage for cows were more prevalent in areas that were more heterogeneous with a high Shannon diversity index. So areas with forests interspersed with land, with agricultural lands and villages, and it was negatively related to distance to forest. So the greater distance to forest, the less likely damage would occur, which corroborates our hypothesis. For sheep, we found slightly different results, where the bear abundance was an important predictor of sheep damage and a positive predictor of sheep damage, while distance to town and distance to forest had a similar direction as for cows. Also, these damages occurred less in areas that were heterogeneous, and this comes, again, this is a reflection of how these animals are being grazed, where the sheep are maybe higher on pastures in more contiguous areas compared to cows. And then for other livestock, we also see that bear abundance, relative bear abundance, is important, and also distance to town as a negative predictor. What we see also is that the other livestock and sheep are a bit more similar in their predictors compared to cows. If we delve a little bit deeper into just cow damage and sheep damage and look at individual predictors and the probability of human-bear conflicts on the y-axis, also split by different land cover types, so where the actual damage occurred, we see that altitude, the more damage occurred at medium altitudes. So along this, basically along this village, in these villages that were situated at the interface, at medium altitudes, at the interface between forest and open habitat, and also again, this is the forest was a negative predictor. We see that for cows, the damage mostly occurred in what we call artificial surfaces, so in towns. So unlike, in contrast to our hypothesis that damage would be mostly reported in like high elevation areas in more contiguous landscapes, we find that most of the damage for sheep has been reported nearby villages, closer to artificial surfaces, which did not corroborate our hypothesis. We then mapped these damages, so we created spatial predictions based on our best models. We use the model averaging procedure to extract the best, the predictors for damage of different livestock. And we see that different patterns occur for cows, sheep, and other livestock. However, there are some patterns in the southern portion of the study area. See this band, this red band, kind of bordering a lowland, while on the western side of the study area, where there's where landscapes are a lot more heterogeneous, with forest interspersed with villages and agricultural land, the risk of damage is spread over a much broader area. It's lower per cell, but spread over a much larger area. And there's definitely less damage in areas with a lot of forest, so mostly the blue areas in this case. And also in the middle of this lowlands away from forests. So just to show a better picture here, so all the yellow dots in the previous slide and the slide are all the damages that were used to model the probability of livestock damage. And the map here, the heat map, shows all species combined just for visualization purposes. And what we see in this case is that these damages really occur in this transition areas between open area of agricultural lowlands and forest. Right? So in villages and situated mid-elevation at this interface, as well as this is in this heterogeneous mixed-use landscapes with a high proportion of forest. So this, what this means is that the landscape configuration as well as heterogeneity are really strong predictors of human-bear conflict, and the direction of strength was variable across livestock types, meaning that we need to apply different mitigation, damage mitigation strategies for different livestock types, and you cannot just propose, blanket strategies across all livestock. The brown bear abundance was important for sheep and for other species, but not for cows, which again kind of goes against some of our hypotheses and what's been found in other literature. And it's definitely worth investigating more. And then also the combination of where settlements or villages are located, and also the grazing management, where cows tend to be left relatively free to graze around the villages, while sheep are more concentrated either in the villages or up in the pastures, are also a strong driver of damage caused by brown bears. So what's next? And why is this important? Like I mentioned earlier, a brown bear hunt ban was imposed in 2016 and still maintained to this day. The management system transitioned from a trophy hunt-based management system at the time to one focused on problem bears. So there's some lethal management of problem bears, especially some of the bears that produce damage. However, since no hunting has occurred, seems like the number of conflicts and the number of bears as well seemingly increased, so there's no real data to back this up. Also, during this time, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, the human-bear conflict gained very heavy national media presence. There's not a single day without a report of a bear entering a yard or house or being on the side of the road. This increase in livestock damage or just in conflict could also be a side effect of media attention. So what we want to do is take some data that we just gained access to between 2017 and 2020, more sparse unfortunately, is to test our model predictions against this new data to see whether the prevalence and also the spatial patterns of human-bear conflict has changed since the hunt ban. But this story here is more than just bears and going and killing and injuring livestock and land cover types and variables. What's happening nowadays as well in the Carpathians is that a lot of habitat degradation from infrastructure projects, from rampant logging, uncontrolled logging, and sometimes illegal and unsustainable land use. Also, this constant shift of social attitudes towards large carnivores in such a way that in some cases the bears really became the public enemy number one, as well as the loss of pastoral traditions. Many people are moving from, there's a rural to urban exodus that's been happening for the last 20, 30 years, as well as the use of large carnivores to gain political momentum calls for really a holistic approach to support coexistence with brown bears. And we hope that this research is able to contribute some information to inform where the conflict occurs and how it can be mitigated, and the fact that we need different strategies for different species. With this, I'd like to thank you for your attention. The data was collected within the framework of a Life Nature program project, Life Ursus, and we also had support from the Romanian National Authority for Scientific Research. This way, I will take your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good evening. My name is Paul Fraser. I'm a senior ecologist with BAR out of Calgary, Alberta. And today I'm going to talk about human-bear conflict management techniques in North America. As bear populations continue to increase and expand their range, the likelihood of human-bear interaction also increases. Humans and bears occasionally come into conflict in areas where they encounter each other. Human-bear conflict management is a serious issue because of the increased risk to people living and working in bear country and the potential loss for bears and bear habitat. I compare human-bear conflict management techniques and present the results from a survey conducted among wildlife management agencies across Canada and the US. The objective is to provide an appraisal of the most common techniques used for mitigating human-bear conflict, as well as the benefits and challenges of each technique. A stratified sampling procedure was used to determine the wildlife management agencies to be surveyed. Provinces and states with self-sustaining bear populations and human-bear conflict reports were surveyed, and human-bear conflict protocols reviewed to identify commonly used techniques. BAR developed a self-administered questionnaire which included 27 questions about bear populations, types of human-bear interaction, management strategies, challenges, and successes. A total of 40 agencies that had more than 100 human-bear conflict reports annually were contacted to participate in the survey. They were asked to provide information on human-bear conflict response in their respective jurisdictions and any available protocols and human-bear conflict guidelines. 29 of the agencies responded, with responses almost evenly distributed between Western and Eastern North America. 83% of the agencies reported human-bear interaction as either a common problem, an increasingly common problem, or a serious problem in their respective jurisdictions. The main types of human-bear conflict identified were garbage food attractions, apiary, orchard, or crop damage, human-bear encounters, campsite encounters, livestock attacks, and some human attacks. Our survey showed that most complaints were received in summer months, approximately 78%, while complaints were the same in spring or fall, around 18%. Human-bear conflicts were not separated by species in those provinces and states where both grizzlies and black bears occur. 25 of the agencies said they have some type of defined or standard protocol or policy for dealing with human-bear interaction and human-bear conflict. 4 agencies reported not having standard protocols. These included Saskatchewan, Minnesota, Vermont, and Washington. 8 human-bear conflict management techniques have been used or at least tested in one or more of the 29 jurisdictions that participated in the survey. These management techniques included education and public awareness, minimizing animal attractants, monitoring wildlife movement, electric fencing, hazing, aversive conditioning, trapping and relocating the animal, and destroying the animal. Educating the public and creating awareness is a key to a successful human-bear conflict management program. All respondents who took part in this study ranked education and public awareness as a top human-bear conflict management technique. 23 of the 29 agencies indicated that they do have a bear education or a bear awareness program. A change in human behavior should be the main objective for any bear awareness program. The motivation to change should be compelling, and bear education and bear awareness programs should be tailored toward more public engagement. Agencies that did not have a bear awareness program included Saskatchewan, Minnesota, Vermont, and Washington. It has been demonstrated in numerous states and provinces across North America that most human-bear conflict can be eliminated through managing anthropogenic food sources. 6 of the 29 agencies surveyed indicated minimizing animal attractants as the #1 technique they use in managing human-bear conflict, while 15 of the agencies ranked this technique second. Real-time monitoring of wildlife location can help in identifying repeat offenders and/or habituated wildlife. None of the agencies ranked monitoring bear movement as the top choice in managing human-bear conflict. 4 of the agencies, BC, New Brunswick, Banff, and Jasper National Parks, ranked this technique second. The rest of the agencies ranked this technique third or lower. Electric fencing has been shown to be one of the most successful ways for keeping bears out of anthropogenic attractants. An advantage for electric fence is that it can be purchased to fit a variety of applications and budgets. A disadvantage is material and labor costs can be substantial. 2 agencies, the Yellowstone National Park and Connecticut, ranked electric fencing second, but overall electric fencing was ranked 5th. Several provinces, for instance BC, Alberta, and Ontario, and several states such as Colorado, Connecticut, New Jersey, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arkansas have bear response guidelines. Response guidelines really depended upon the age, sex, and family status of the bear, its behavior, is it habituated, food condition, and the level of threat to public safety. 4 levels or response categories were identified by these various agencies. The lowest level is where a bear exhibited normal behavior, was no threat to public safety, and therefore did not require a site visit. The highest level is where a bear is an immediate threat to public safety, requires an immediate site visit, and may need to be trapped and relocated or euthanized. Hazing is a technique where deterrents are administered to a bear to immediately modify the bear's undesirable behavior. It involves creating a negative experience for a bear that has been habituated and doesn't exhibit natural avoidance of humans or developed areas. Visual or acoustic stimuli such as cracker shells, loud noise, or human voice have been successfully used to chase bears away. Their effectiveness as deterrents is often limited to short-term effects, as bears often become habituated to such stimuli. Hazing was ranked #1 by one agency in Kananaskis Country, Alberta, and ranked #2 by 2 others, Denali National Park and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. All other agencies ranked this management technique 4th or lower. Aversive conditioning is a learning process in which deterrents are continually and consistently administered to a bear to reduce the frequency of an undesirable behavior. Administration of aversive conditioning is aimed at making the bear associate humans with the negative stimulus, reinstilling bears' natural fear of humans, and deterring future nuisance behavior. Consistency is key to the success of aversive conditioning techniques and can be less effective when dealing with mature animals with established behaviors. 79% of the agencies surveyed use AC techniques. It's ranked 3rd as a management technique. 6 agencies do not use aversive conditioning techniques. This included Saskatchewan, Yukon, New Brunswick, Alabama, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. A common pattern that emerged from the review was that the success of aversive conditioning greatly depended on the level of habituation to human presence and food conditioning of a bear. It's a very effective tool for keeping bears that were not food conditioning from becoming food conditioned. 55% of the agencies use loud noises as their first choice. 21% used rubber bullets in beanbags, and 7% used trained barking dogs as their top choice. The use of tasers is under evaluation in 3 states: Colorado, Alaska, and Tennessee. The challenges with the use of cracker shells or gunshots is they're only effective in the short term. Bears quickly habituate to loud noises. They don't work on food-conditioned bears. It requires training. They may be a fire hazard, and shells may misfire, fail to explode, or explode prematurely. Rubber bullets and beanbags are expensive. They require specialized equipment and proper training. They're limited in the range and accuracy. All rounds are not created equal. Rubber bullets have a potential for injury, and they don't work on food-conditioned bears. Bear dogs are expensive, and there's a limited availability of trained dogs. They require specialized training, and it needs swift action to move dogs to the area of need. 69% of the agencies surveyed relocated captured bears within their home range or translocated captured bears outside their home range. Capture only occurred when other management techniques have been implemented and proven ineffective, or when human safety was a concern. Advantages of relocation or translocation are they prevent destroying an animal, mitigate conflict on a temporary or permanent basis, and allow time to address attractants. The disadvantages include the cost and time involved and the risk to the animal, such as immobilization, stress, and release into an unknown environment. 7 agencies did not relocate bears: Alabama, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, and Virginia. Euthanasia is a measure taken when a bear poses a risk to human safety, exhibits repeated aggressive behavior, or is severely injured or in a very poor condition. None of the agencies identified euthanasia as their first or second choice, and only 3 agencies chose this as their third or fourth option. Education and public awareness was ranked number 1 by 80% of the agencies. Minimizing animal attractants was ranked number 1 by 24% of the agencies, and ranked number 2 by 50% of the agencies. Aversion techniques was ranked 3rd, hazing was 4th, electric fencing was 5th, monitoring wildlife movements was 6th, trapping was 7th, and destroying an animal was ranked last. In summarizing, basic response protocols and management strategies varied between provinces and states, but there were a few common themes. Human-bear interactions are complex and diverse, and there's no single one-for-all solution to effectively prevent all human-bear conflict. Successful conflict management requires a multifaceted approach aimed primarily at reducing or eliminating human-bear conflict rather than simply responding to it. Use of projectiles and other deterrents, such as dogs, on nuisance bears can be effective, but do not provide a permanent solution if attractants remain present. According to the results of this survey, preventing access to anthropogenic food in combination with public education is in many cases the most effective approach.
My talk today is titled, Can Regulated Hunting Reduce Human Black Bear Interactions? This is work done collaboratively with Eric Howe, Jeremy Inglis, Erica Newton, Marty Obard, Bruce Pond, and Derek Potter. Wildlife-human conflict, and particularly human-carnivore conflict, have an array of negative effects on both species, ecosystems, and people. Obviously, conflict between carnivores and certain groups of people can lead to species declines. These declines in carnivores can lead to the disruption of ecosystem processes through trophic cascades. And in many places, conflicts between people and carnivores can have substantial impact on human well-being through decreased safety of people in certain places, and also financial impacts for those who lose livestock or other livelihoods through conflict with carnivores. And carnivores are particularly prone to conflict because of their wide range, the fact that they pose potential safety issues to people, and because they eat food that often is grown by people, such as livestock. To address conflict, there's been an array of conflict reduction measures between people and carnivores that have proven successful under different contexts. One of these is obviously lethal control, whereby the public or wildlife agencies will kill large numbers of carnivores to reduce conflict. Financial incentives to promote coexistence, so things like paying landowners or livestock ranchers who lose livestock to carnivores for the cost of that animal that was lost. Education programs, and then also particularly for bears, attractant control, so things like bear-proof garbage bins and other bear-proof things that can help to reduce the amount of attractants that are available to bears on the landscape. Among the measures that have been tested to reduce conflict, regulated or licensed harvest holds a certain allure for those in wildlife management. And the main reason for this is that if it's successful, if managers are successful in being able to reduce conflict between people and wildlife through regulated harvest, it obviously can meet multiple objectives. You can increase the amount of harvest availability for hunters while also reducing conflict. And this is important because tolerance can be higher for species that provide multiple economic benefits. So if you're providing the economic benefit to outfitters or to hunters through ability to hunt wildlife or hunt carnivores, then this can also possibly increase tolerance. However, the evidence for the effectiveness of using hunting to control conflict between people and carnivores and between people and bears in particular is pretty mixed and quite nuanced. So in Ontario, which is where this work that I'm talking about today took place, we had a really unique situation that allowed us to really rigorously assess the effectiveness of increases in regulated harvest on conflict between people and black bears. And the sort of management intervention or management treatment that we had was the initiation of a new spring bear hunt in certain units in the province. So this map here shows Ontario. All the gray areas are those that have or gray and red areas are those wildlife management units that have a regulated hunt for black bears. Prior to 2014, there was only a fall hunt in all of these areas. Between 2014 and 2015, a pilot spring black bear hunt was implemented in those units that are shown in red there. And then in 2015, this spring hunt was brought in provincially for the entire province that's shown in gray and red here. So our objectives were to use this sort of unique management experiment to rigorously test the hypothesis that increased legal harvest can control human-bear interactions. And we also sought to understand a suite of other factors that may be driving spatial and temporal variation in human-bear interactions. And as I mentioned previously in the previous slide, we had these sort of treatment and control units that we used, and we were able to implement this analysis in a really nice before-after control impact design, where we have our before and after the initiation of the spring black bear hunt. We have control units that did not get a spring hunt, and then we have the impact or treatment units that received the spring hunt. The data we used as our sort of proxies for incidents or interactions between people and bears were the number of calls that were put into the provincial bear incident reporting hotline during this time when the spring hunt was put into place. We split these calls out into two different groups. One was really any call, so any call that came into the bear incident reporting hotline. And then a set of calls that we dubbed severe calls. And these included reports where human safety was potentially at risk. So bears being in schoolyards, being very close to houses, actually contacting people, or where there was damage to property. So breaking into garages, breaking into cars, those sorts of things. Our analytical approach for trying to understand the influence of these factors or of hunting and of other factors on interactions between people and bears is shown here. We use a hierarchical Poisson regression on the number of calls. So the number of calls or the number of severe calls to the provincial reporting hotline we're using our dependent variable. And then for our Backy design, we included covariates for if the year of reporting was before or after the implementation of the pilot, and whether it was a treatment effect, treatment unit or not. And then plus we had interactions between these to be able to allow us to tease out whether interactions increased or decreased disproportionately in our treatment units versus our control units. And because we know other factors influence bear-human conflict besides this spring hunt, we also included covariates for food availability, which is known to be a very strong driver of interactions with people and bears, and then also harvest density, so how many bears per square kilometer were harvested in each unit. Okay, so jumping right into some of the results. So as expected, and as many previous studies have shown, the strongest driver of the number of incidents and severe incidents, or calls and severe calls to the Bearwise hotline, was driven by food availability. So these figures here are very similar. They show on the left the number of the predicted calls to the provincial reporting hotline. On the right is the predicted severe calls on the hotline, or to the hotline, and the x-axes of both of these show our standardized bear food index. And you can see in years where there was more food, when our bear food index was high, there was less conflict or less calls, and when food index was low, there were many more calls. So that was the main driver, but we also saw some interesting results relative to the treatment units and the before-after control impact design. So this figure again shows on the left all of the calls to the provincial hotline, and on the right are the severe calls. Across the bottom we have on the far left the control units, so those that did not receive a spring hunt prior to the initiation of the spring hunt. The next one over is the treatment units prior to the initiation of the hunt. And then the next two are our control after the initiation of the spring hunt and our treatment after the initiation of the spring hunt. And you can see even prior to the spring pilot hunt being brought in, those units that were the treatment units already had a much higher rate of incidence between people and black bears. And these were actually chosen for that reason. However, after the initiation of the hunt, both severe calls and all calls stayed constant in our control units, but increased. They actually increased pretty substantially, up to over 30% in our treatment units. And though this is just showing our sort of our raw data, but in our regression, the effect of being in a treatment unit after the initiation of the spring hunt was a significant effect, indicating that there was a statistical increase in the number of calls and severe calls after the initiation of the spring hunt in the units that had a spring hunt. Okay, so just wrapping things up, jumping into some conclusions here. So first off, we see the new spring season led to around 20% increase in harvest. This figure here on the right shows a number of different things, but I just want you to focus on the thick black line, the solid black line. This shows the number of bears that were harvested provincially in Ontario between 2004 and 2019. And following that black line, looking right at 2014, you can see that the number of calls started to increase precipitously in that green area and blue area of the plot, right at directly coinciding with the number, or with the initiation of the spring hunt. And so you can see by 2015, which was the second year of the spring hunt, we'd had an almost 1/3 increase in the number of bears harvested. And once the spring hunt was brought in provincially to all units, it jumped to its highest level ever on record. And concomitant to these increases in harvest, we actually see an increase in the proxies of conflict. So our conflict measures, our calls to the provincial reporting hotline can be seen in these gray bars, and you can see this increase in the 2014, 15, and 16 time period. As I mentioned previously, food availability was clearly the main driver of conflict. When there was lots of food, there was few conflicts. When there was little food, there was a lot of conflict. And interestingly, in years that there was more harvest, so even ignoring our treatment and control zones, so looking after the spring hunt was brought into all units, in years with more harvest, there was actually a greater number of calls to the hotline. Okay, so a couple possibly confusing results here, and so I just want to spend the last couple minutes talking through two sort of a little bit confusing things that came out of this. So first, why do we think that interactions increased with the spring hunt brought into those pilot units? We have a couple reasons why we think this might be going on. We haven't really nailed this down yet, but first we think there may have been more media attention. There's some work that shows that when species are shown in the media, when there's discussion of carnivores or other species in the media, it often can lead to heightened awareness of the public, by the public, of those species. And so possibly these units where the spring hunt was brought in could have seen more media attention and just more willingness to call the hotline. In addition, more human-derived food through hunter baits being out on the landscape could potentially have habituated bears. So in Ontario, we almost exclusively hunt over bait, and now there was a lot more hunters in the spring bringing out bait in large quantities into the woods, potentially habituating bears to human food. And then lastly, there's this potential that the social hierarchy of bears had something to play in this issue. So the main thing being that Ontario previously did not have a spring hunt, so it's possible that older male bears, once the spring hunt was initiated, were more prone to being harvested, leaving younger male bears in place, which are more likely to be coming into conflict with people. The other sort of confusing result was, why was there more interactions with more harvest? And here we think this is mainly a more fine-scale effect of food. So we know that harvest goes up during years of bad food. We know that conflict goes up during years of bad food. Our food availability index is relatively coarse, and so we actually think that years with higher harvest is actually capturing finer scale variation in food availability, leading to years with more harvest being those that have worse food years, and those then leading to higher levels of conflict between people and bears. Okay, so just to finish up here with my last slide and wrap this up. So the conclusions we came out of this are things we sort of knew already. So regulated harvest aims for sustainability, and that means it's typically not going to be sufficient to reduce populations to the point where the number of interactions between bears and people are reduced. And doing so, and increasing hunting, particularly increasing with bait, may have some unintended consequences. We don't know for sure if what the mechanism for why interactions increased after the hunt, but we do know it's possible that this was due to habituation due to increased baiting. And so bringing in these sorts of hunts can have unintended consequences. And lastly, in order to be able to really reduce interactions through harvest, we have to have a hunt that was unsustainable in nature, at least according to what the data show in Ontario. And so these two ideas are largely not copacetic with one another, and we believe that unless we were to try to reduce the population, we'd have little impact on the number of conflicts between people and bears. And with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second human-bear interaction session, which is sponsored by Bear Deterrent Counter Assault. So on behalf of the conference, thank you for sponsoring us. This is a Q&A session for 4 pre-recorded talks related to the ecology and management of human-bear conflicts. I will introduce now our speakers. Before that, unfortunately, there are 2 of them that have not made it yet. We hope they may appear soon, hopefully in a minute, but it's possible they will not make it. But anyways, I encourage everyone to make the questions they have for them. If you find that they can be addressed by the panel or can be interesting for discussion, then please make them anyway. So now I will introduce the speakers. First, we have Francis Aurich from Peru. Francis's research interests focus on the ecology and conservation of large mammals, particularly Andean bears in northern Peru. She has been involved in the study of this species since 2014, working with the Spectacled Bear Conservation Society. In her master's project, Francis sought to answer research questions that help mitigate human and bear conflict and collected reliable data to aid in our understanding of the ecological needs of Andean bears, such as temporal and spatial habitat use and bear-cattle coexistence. The title of her presentation is Assessing the Effects of Cattle on Andean Bear Habitat and Use in a Protected Area in Northern Peru. Hello, Francis.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Carlos.
You're welcome. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Nope.
No?
Not for now.
Okay. So we are missing Joe Northrup and also Paul Fraser, but I will introduce them anyway. Joe Northrup is a researcher scientist with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. His research focuses on the effects of humans on wildlife with a focus on large mammals. And the title of his presentation is Assessing the Influence of a Spring Hunting Season on Black Bear Harvest and Bear-Human Interactions in Ontario, Canada. Paul Fraser also comes from Canada, and he's a senior ecologist at BAR Engineering and Environmental Sciences in Alberta. Paul has nearly 3 decades of experience as a wildlife biologist working in northern and western Canada, and he has substantial knowledge on wildlife management and population assessment, land use management, biophysical impact assessment, and at-risk species. The title of his presentation is A Survey of Human-Bear Conflict Management Techniques by Wildlife Agencies in Canada and the United States in 2019. I think he's not still here, no? No. I hope he can join us in a while. But finally, our last speaker is Viorel Popescu. He is an associate professor at Ohio University and a researcher at the University of Bucharest. He has been working on carnivore conservation in Romania for over 15 years, and his research is focused on understanding basic population ecology and the effects of human pressure, including harvesting, on carnivore species, with a particular focus on brown bears. When not chasing or being chased by carnivores in the Carpathians, he spends time studying amphibian declines and working with management agencies and other sectors to develop monitoring programs for at-risk wildlife. The title of his presentation is Prevalence and Predictors of Brown Bear Livestock Damage in the Eastern Romanian Carpathians. Hello, Viorel. How are you?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Carlos. Nice to meet everybody here.
Where are you now, Viorel? Are you in the US or in Romania?
Yes, I'm in Ohio, yeah.
In Ohio, okay. Okay, so we hope you have all watched the presentations, and I found them very interesting, particularly, and I saw they focus on some common questions like what are the main drivers of conflict or what strategies can help mitigating conflict, promoting coexistence. And now is your turn. Please make all questions you have. I guess you already know it, but I will just say it once again. You can either raise your hand in the bottom part of the screen. You have this smiley face, and if you click in reactions, then you can click on raise your hand, and then I will go one by one, and you are able to unmute yourself. So when I will say your name, please stay tuned and unmute yourself and make the question. But you can also make any questions in the chat. Make sure that you are writing to everyone and not only to a particular participant. So yeah, now is your turn. And if you have questions for more than one speaker, please make them, because they are generally very good questions and they will enable the discussion. And yeah, with that I finish. Someone has a question? I have some written, but I hope that
you do have one question in the chat already. So if you
okay,
yep,
thank you.
No problem.
For Francis, what are some financing options in Peru to monitor bears or mitigate conflict? Are there government funds, or is it mostly NGOs or international funds?
Okay. Hi, Mariela. Thanks for your question. And this one is a very interesting one. Actually, I work for an NGO when I was doing my master's project, so I use their data. But in Peru, as in many countries, I guess funding is very limited. So there are some government funds, but I think that they mostly go to protected areas, which is very recent in terms of the study. For example, the Andean bear, they are just giving them some camera traps, but they're very limited. SBC, the organization that I use their data, they definitely use international funds, and they are part of the of WCN from the United States. So yeah, it's mostly international. You're welcome.
So I have a question also to you, Francis. So when there is a cattle depredation, there is no compensation system whatsoever in Peru. So farmers will not receive any economic compensation.
Actually, in the protected area where we conducted the study, there was not cattle depredation, which was very interesting because it happens in other parts of the range. However, if this happened in the protected area, I don't think there will be a compensation. But if it happens in private areas, probably. But I don't think the government has a specific program that will compensate local villagers for that.
Okay. And do you think this may change in the future?
It might, but what they have some, how you say, a plan management for the protected area. And there they include or state that there are some part of the year where cattle are allowed. However, this is not always being followed. And I think that the government might stick on that side. Like if you're, breaking the rule, we might not attend this need. But also, if that's going to help, to solve the conflict, I think that it's probably an option, personally.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any question so far. Okay, so I will use mine there. I have a question to Viorel. Am I saying it right? It's Viorel, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So I saw that in your presentation you divide the damages by the type of livestock that was predated, right? And then you see that the predictors are not the same for each livestock type in your models. So this, I think you suggest that this will make that mitigation strategies can differ from one livestock type to another. But the question is, if you think that there is one or two type of techniques that will help to reduce the impact of damage for all livestock types.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the question. So I will start my answer with the disclaimer. For this talk and for this research, I'm acting as more of a messenger and analyst of data. My colleague Mihai, who's online right now, actually is the one that coordinated the data collection, and he has a lot more details. I'll try to answer, and I will invite him to pitch in at any time in the conversation. But just in terms of your question, to jumpstart it here, if there's any techniques, I mean, lots of the damage happened inside villages, which was a little bit more unexpected, especially for sheep, where we thought they're going to happen up in the kind of the higher elevation areas, in the high like alpine pastures, where sheep are grazed in the during the summer. But guard dogs and electric fences. There's a lot of research going on right now that show that, in Romania, the combination of these techniques for sheep, at least, they work, and they work fairly well. I think it's so on that side, and the other side is really the management regime for cows, for example. They're really grazed kind of free-ranged, almost. They're not really in in an enclosure, and animals kind of roam the forest in some cases. So for that, we need to work a little bit more on the type of grazing and people's way of doing things, which is hard because that's been the traditional way of grazing livestock in this area mostly. And then for events happening in the villages, obviously that's that's a more, I think, a bit more complicated. Many things should interact there, from preventing the bears from coming into villages by reducing access to other sources of food that are around the villages. And also intervention by local authorities if the animals do come into rapid intervention, which right now it's not happening.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question here for you from Sabrina. What was the timing on the depredation for the different livestock? Also, what variability, if there was any, was there for depredation during years of lower food availability, such as drought years? My research has indicated a very strong nutritional driver, high fat, high carb during hyperphagia for food selection. So I was curious as to if sheep, cattle, or the livestock types were depredated at different times of the year. Sorry.
All right, that's a really great question. I would invite Mihai to, if he's around and he listens right now, to talk about the timing, and also I know that there was the correlation there with mast years versus high food years versus low food years. Mihai.
Thank you, Viorel. Yes, there are differences related to predation on cattle and sheep and livestock, other type of livestock. Other type of livestock usually occur close to the villages or inside the villages. And this happens all year, including sometimes in the winter months. For sheep and cattle that are now using the pasture, it's the peak of the attacks is in August and September. Then from end of September it starts to go down a little bit. In the last year, maybe because of increasing surface of corn crops. So from end of September, the farmers don't have enough space to store the corn, and they leave it on the field until November, for example, or December. So this is one factor. Regarding to sheep and cattle, we have cattle are staying more on the pastures. In the past, 30 years ago, in the communist time, the cows were raised mostly inside the villages and settlements and special farms. Now they occupy the secondary pastures in the hill areas, and at the same time, the sheep traditionally raised in the mountain pastures. Now they are raised and they are staying more also to the secondary pasture in at a lower altitude. So during the last 30 years, we had these changes in management of livestock, and this is somehow affecting. If we look back, we had more sheep conflicts. If we look, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. So management has also something to say when it's about conflicts. Also, we have regions on which we have less sheep and more cattle, and then of course we have more cattle's losses. Hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Mihai. We have one question for Joseph Northrup. He's not here, but I can read it, and in case anyone would like to comment on it, please just unmute yourself and feel free to participate in the discussion. So the question is, the number of conflict calls appears to have dropped the year before the initiation of the hunt, but the average before that was as high or higher than the first years, and that conflict calls reduced substantially in subsequent years. Could the initial increase in conflict be more to do with disruption caused by the initiation of a new hunt, and that in years going forward, as spring hunting becomes the norm for the population, that conflict will stabilize to per-hunt levels, higher or lower? It's a lot of complexity in here. If maybe someone working in this area or in a similar area with similar things would like to comment on that. Okay, if not, we will pass these questions to Joe and ask him to please answer them. I have another question from Lori to all the speakers. Is there compensation for farmers that install electric fences or other mitigation? If not, is that a challenge where you are?
So do you want to go first or either way? We can talk about Romania first and then Peru. Or, yeah, so, and again, I'll ask Mihai to pitch in a little bit. So there's lots of the electric fences are being installed. They've been really through different projects, you know, where these things are being bought and given to sheep herders in general. The compensation in Romania, it's really there's damage compensation for livestock loss. It is a challenge to get that money because the way the procedure for calling in a damage works, there's a lot of especially when this damages happen in like in remote areas, there have to be a bunch of representatives for all sort of institutions that have to go in and fill in a whole bunch of paperwork, and only after that the damage compensation can be given. Because of that, and because it's really difficult access in some cases, some people don't really take advantage of it. Simply because it's just too complicated, process. Mihai, do you want to add something to it?
No, this is exactly the situation. There was a plan to create a financial program for farmers to buy electric fences or other kind of equipments that they need for protect their farms, but it's not on place for now. It's like Viorel said, when you want to be compensated, you have to prove that you try to protect your farm. But at the same time, I think this will change, and everybody who will have damage, even if has or not protection, will get the compensation. This is the last proposal of the government, and it's true we have this problem with compensation because we have a centralized system. Romania is one of the largest countries from Europe, and unfortunately all the decisions related to money are taken in Bucharest, so the bureaucracy is very, very high.
Thank you, Viorel and Mihai. Francis, would you like to answer also?
Yes. Well, I can add something because we don't have fences in the north of Peru, at least in some areas where I know. It would be interesting, but as I said, we don't have so much of depredation of conflict with bears, specifically in this case. But yeah, it would be interesting to see. I know that there are some areas in the south where there are conflict with bears, so it would be interesting to see. But again, if we come to funding, it will be challenging too, because it would be pretty much the same issue, how to get them there, or first how to get the money to buy them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about this question because it says, is there compensation for farmers that install electric fences or other mitigation? So is the question that only those that install fences or mitigation techniques should receive compensations, and those that are not trying to protect their exploitations should be somehow penalized for not doing their work. I know this, some farmers will try to punch me now for what I'm saying, but I wonder if the question was going in that direction.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about it that way. That's a good, that's a good. I was just trying to, you know, here we try to give compensation so that people are more likely to install electric fences. So I guess that's why I did specifically say farmers, but yeah.
Yeah, you mean like to pay for electric fences, not compensation for damage?
Help pay for electric fences. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Should have been a little more specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that they're more likely to install an electric fence than, you know, because here sometimes it's just hard for us to get people on board to do these different tools that we have in our toolbox to help them not have conflict. And so I just know if that was also happening in other places.
Sorry, I will try to answer this again because we answered only partially. For now in Romania, you get compensation only if you can prove that you had some kind of protection system. It is not necessary to have an electric fence. If you had dogs, or if a person was present during the attack, or the animals were inside an enclosure, that inspectors group, which is formed by 4 persons from different institutions, had to decide if the measure were properly taken. And they can decide if you get the compensation or not. But further, they will like to take this out from the legislation. So everybody who has a damage will be compensated. Yeah. We have maybe in absolute number of incidents, probably we have the highest number of conflicts with bears from Europe. In terms of cost, not, because in Sweden everything is more expensive, or in Germany than in Romania. So in terms of money, Northern Europe probably has more cost allocated to compensation. But at least in Romania, the average of the last 5 years was like 600,000 euros, something like this. Only for those that they could prove that they protect somehow their livestock or their crops.
Yeah. But I want to add something here. I think there's also a difference in terms of what Lori was mentioning. You know, like money for the actual gear for the fence is not necessarily for the damage. You know, in the way livestock, like raising, growing, is done. So Lori asked about farmers, you know, so that I would assume that, you know, especially for some North American examples, you know, an electric fence would actually include, you know, a large area where you're grazing your animals, right? When we're talking about Romania, electric fences are very small. They're just basically like for a pen where you keep your sheep, right? So the costs themselves might be different. You know, 50-meter fence versus, you know, 500-meter fence that you would need to enclose a much larger area if you have a larger, you know, cattle herd. There's the same thing, you know, like in the Carpathians, the livestock growers are very small groups. So when we talk about cows, I mean, we don't talk about like hundreds or even dozens. You know, they're very small groups of animals here and there. I mean, sheep, like each individual person in a village in Romania has like 2 cows, right? It's not, you know, hundreds. So, and then same thing with sheep. You know, the sheep herds, you know, could be 100 animals, 200 animals, but basically at night you can just put them in a small pen. So that reduces the cost of the actual fence greatly. And I think I was mentioning earlier, so there's a program right now, a large project for implementing the National Action Plan for brown bear, which includes a lot of like purchasing a lot of electric fences and providing them to sheep herders and to cattle growers. And over the next, I don't know, like 3-4 years, I think it's the project.
That's great, no? That the farmers will have access to these measures. We have another question here for everyone from Mariela. Is it challenging to prove a livestock predation was actually done by a bear? In Argentina, we had to develop a protocol for jaguars because it is very challenging.
Yes, there are some challenges. Again, I've been repeating this in the north of Peru and especially in the Lambayeque region. We have not have livestock depredation problems, at least not so many. And in the south or in other parts of the range, yes, there are some protocols because it is challenging. But right now there are some other sources where we can see like what exactly happened. For example, some studies are placing camera traps, which are helping to, answer who, let's say, killed the cow in this specific case. Or also they're looking for some, if there is a hair from a bear or signs. But yeah, it is challenging. And I know that there are some studies that are proving that people are just, saying, okay, this was killed by a bear, but in the end it wasn't. So it might need to be nailed to a more precise protocol.
Thank you, Francis.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in Romania, it's probably similar. I mean, there's no, they're not doing any sort of like DNA testing to figure out exactly, like a predator testing. So it's really the like expertise of the folks that come in and assess the situation. That's the extent of the answer I can give. Anyway. Yeah. Maybe Mihai has more insights.
Again, things are evolving pretty much fast. In the past, there was no veterinary involved to make this assessment, and practically the conclusions were based on what the hunters were saying, because the game managers have to be present at the inspection. Now we have some kind of guidelines. They are not officially. In Romania, I think it's not so difficult because we have bear, wolves, and lynx, and it's pretty much easy to differentiate between them. Sometimes we have problems with lost sheep found that in the forest. We don't know for sure if there are stray dogs or wolves, but also there you can identify. But if a sheep is lost in the forest, doesn't matter what was the carnivore to make the predation. It's a sheep killed in a forest by a predator is not compensated. So officially, the sheep cannot stay in the forest in Romania. So we have this filter included. But now more and more veterinaries are present at these inspections in the last 2 years. And I think this is good, and it makes sense from my perspective, because a veterinary can assess not just the predator but also the time of death and of course with approximation, and can say more things about the animal that was killed, which is also relevant for the cost, that for the value of the compensation.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. I have passed here a link of an article in which there are some, I think in the supplementary materials, there are some protocols of how the predation by different large carnivore species are assessed to confirm whether it was killed by one species or another. Because for what I know, sometimes here in Poland, bears go to the beehives, and then you see 5 beehives totally destroyed all over, and a bear footprint in one of the frames and a scat on the other side, and then you don't have a doubt that was a bear. Yeah. But in other cases, as Mihai and Viorel and Francis were saying, of course they are more difficult. But there are protocols. There are protocols. And even though I think sometimes there are cases that probably there is no 100% confidence on who was the responsible animal. Okay, I don't see more questions now, but I have one here for Francis. Correct me if I'm wrong. I saw you check the segregation, the temporal segregation in the use of bears, also cattle, and humans with dogs, or humans and or dogs. Yeah, in camera traps. Yeah, but then also I remember in your presentation there was a map, and you were showing that in some cameras you were capturing only cattle, in others only bears, in other cattle and bears. Is that correct?
Yes.
So my question is, if you check that temporal segregation with the data from all the cameras, or if you selected only the cameras that were capturing bears and cattle, or bears and humans. Have I explained myself properly?
Yes,
Okay.
I think I got it. For this map, if I go back, yeah, so it was we selected, it were all the cameras for both seasons. So this is basically, we pull all the data and then check, okay, which camera has only bears, only cattle, and both of them. But yeah, we didn't segregate the data into dry or wet for this specific map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my question is, then you show, maybe you can share the presentation with us. I think this way it will be easier to understand.
Sure. Sure. Let me find the map here. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so this is the map.
Yes.
So black points are only Andean bear, and then we have gray points, Andean bear and cattle, and then we have only cattle. And
right.
But then 2 slides ahead, we have the temporal overlap.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. And my question is if these figures used all data, or the data in the ones that are in the upper, those that are in the upper part, only use the data from the cameras that trap bears and cattle.
Oh, I see. No,
okay.
all the data.
Yeah. And have you checked the other to see if there is any change? Because maybe if you use only the data from the cameras where the 2 species appear, maybe you may find a different path. I don't know. When I saw it, I thought that it may be interesting, and I wonder if you already did.
Okay, so here, let's say in this, like, if I'm just trying to reconfigure here. So we are here in this map, it's all the data together, meaning cameras that, for example, we separate, right? Cameras that only had bears, cattle, or both of them. So for the temporal, we did it for both seasons, meaning I say all the data, meaning for both surveys, but not all the cameras that didn't include them for this temporal. So it was only the cameras that had bear detections and cattle detections and bear detections and people and dogs.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So that was my question. Okay, now it's all clear. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't understanding it there.
So still no questions we have.
So can I come back a little bit to one of the question that Sabrina posed earlier? I
Yes,
think,
please.
Mihai answered that partially about the timing within a year in terms of damage, but what the other question was whether lower mast year, like lower food production year, coincide maybe with like high damage. The answer here is really complicated. So first of all, we don't really have a lot of good data on the phenology of masting, but things are really complicated by what, in Romanian bear management, at least up to 2016, it's like the elephant in the room, which is supplemental feeding, where large amounts of food are always being placed in the forest for animals, including for bears. Right now, up to 2016, food is not aimed at bears, but other species, but bears still enjoy, corn and other things. So the relationship there is a little bit more complicated than just, high mast years equals, low predation on livestock and vice versa. And this is something that needs a lot more discussion in the Romanian bear management area, and it's very difficult to bring that up and to really estimate, because there's no reports of how much food is actually supplied to wildlife. I mean, each manager is mandated to do so, and some are more zealous than others. Let's put it that way. So it makes it very difficult to really look at like natural mast years versus predation, unfortunately.
Yeah. Regarding that, I think there is a statement from the Large Carnivores Initiative for Europe about the use of supplementary feeding and the negative impact that it can have on large carnivores, and that can be useful in some discussions with the authorities in order to regulate it or ban it if necessary. No? We have another question. Francis from Kelly. Can you speak to livestock grazing practices in your study area? How much human presence occurs with the livestock, if any?
Okay, thanks for your question, Kylie. Okay, so in the Lucky Pampa Wildlife Refuge, which is a protected area located in north of Peru, actually, before the refuge was created, people were using the area to graze their cattle. So when they created the area, I think that the government made an arrangement with the local people that they were going to continue to be allowed to use the area, but in a specific time of the year, which in this case, it's the wet or the summer time, where there is more vegetation, there is more rain, and they thought, okay, this is going to be easier for wildlife and livestock to use the area. So that's stated there. And what they do is, I think that they have a book where they keep like every local villager. I don't know if there is a number that they are allowed to have, but as many, I don't know, many places in the world, it's not always followed. There are probably about right now 600 cattle inside the protected area, and they are allowed only in the wet season, but they're also during the rest of the year because they are kind of wild cattle. In terms of human presence inside the Laquipampa Wildlife Refuge, yes, people go a lot. We didn't capture many, we don't have many pictures of people during the survey, but it is because we know that sometimes, or most of the time, they avoided the cameras. So they walk behind the cameras. But because I've been there and we see it, so they do go a lot to hunt their cattle back. So they say there is a specific time of the year where they group and 10 people go to hunt cattle for, let's say, the festival of the town. So there is a lot of human use. They also go every day, not only because of the cattle, but to pick some wood or even fruits, wild fruits that they are collecting and selling it. Yeah, so I don't know if I answer your question, or if you want to follow up with anything else, I'm here.
Francis, when you say hunt the cattle,
Yeah.
you mean I just want to
understand. That's what I said this, because they're free range and they have to collect it back, let's say, to sell the meat, for example.
Yes.
So they go in a group, so they will round it because it's so hard to get one kind of free range cattle back.
Okay.
Sometimes they will shoot them, and we have photographs of people walking with the meat, walking down the mountain. It is cattle, we hope. But yeah, so that's what I meant.
Okay, that's new to me. Thank you.
Okay, here she's saying, I was curious if the higher influence of cattle in the dry season was due to humans trying to gather their cattle more. That's a good question. Probably, but I don't think we had many detections of, well, again, probably because they avoided the cameras. It can be a reason that during the dry season, the effect was higher because of people. But again, from my local understanding is that they go mostly during the wet season to collect their cattle, because that's the time where cattle will be in better shape. Like they will be bigger, fatter, there is more food available. So, but yeah, it would be a good thing to consider.
Francis, I have also here noted that you were sampling from August to March of the next year, yeah? And I wonder if you expect the same results if you would sample from March to August. So the months that you didn't sample, or if...
Yeah, probably no. Actually, after this sampling, it was 2016, and I think that in 2017, a big fire happened in the protected area. So it would be really interesting to see, for example, what's happening right now that the forest is probably regenerating. But yeah, it would be really interesting. I didn't do it because of logistic, and this survey were already collected. But yeah, it would be really neat to see what's happening, on the reverse in terms of dates.
And how I am ignorant on this, so I wonder, because you say the dry and the wet season. So from March to August, so spring and summer, it is, well, this is not there. There is different because it's already south hemisphere, no?
Yes.
But from March to August, this is dry, is wet, or is something else? Is normal?
The wet
season?
season starts, we usually say, from December to March or April.
Okay.
So that's when, and then it dries, like everything gets dry. It's mostly, we basically get 2 seasons, and then are like dry and wet seasons.
So it would be an extension of the dry season then. Okay.
Yeah.
You have another question. Do Andean bears remain active all throughout the winter?
Yes, they do not hibernate in this area. They do, but it's a slower activity. I shouldn't comment on that because I didn't study that part, but they do have a slower activity. They are more active during the summertime, we said. There is a very key food resource during that time that it's called the sapote, but they eat the sapote fruit. And this fruit becomes available during the summertime. So this is where, and it's very important because it's high in fat and carbs, I think. This is when they are more active, trying to feed so they get ready for the winter time, when there is not much food, but also for us, it's dry, it's hotter, there is less vegetation, no rains. So yeah, but they do remain active. But they are just more located in the higher parts of the mountains, I should say.
Okay. I have a question to Viorel and Mija, if he's still here. As a part of the study with the results of your models, you at the end made a risk map, yeah? So you assess spatially the probability of predation, yeah? So are you planning or expecting that this could be used by authorities if they will start subsidizing preventive measures, as Viorel said, with this new project? Or because I think that is finally the utility, and that could help mitigating conflicts, no? Do you expect this or not? If not, how frustrating could that be?
No, that's a great question, and ultimately that's the goal, right? It's to really inform where mitigation practices could be implemented. I feel like might have like more use, not necessarily the national level, like Mihai was saying, like here's everything so centralized, just like pull resources down, but even at a local level, because the local authorities do have a lot of power in their decision making in general, and even the game management unit managers, they manage the wildlife in their areas, can actually do more and really just from interacting with the local communities and really have those boots on the ground in terms of steering management in the right direction by highlighting this like high risk areas. I mean, ideally, we have something like this for the whole Bear Range, which would be ideal, and across many different a range of bear density. I mean, within this area that we studied, there is, I mean, probably we have the highest bear densities in some of these areas, probably in Romania or even in Europe, in some of these kind of like lowland areas where bears tend to come down into the closer to the villages and crops. to something to densities that are a little less, the densities that we're talking about maybe like 25, 30 bears per 100 square kilometers, down to maybe like 9, 10 bears per square kilometers. There's definitely areas where density is lower in other parts of the bear range. But yeah, it would be good to be able to relate that back to the real density. So in the study, we did use a relative measure of density. Was fairly coarse because it was at this level of game management unit, which are about 100 square kilometers each.
And if I remember well, the data you used was all pre-hunting ban, yes?
Yes, it was pre-hunting ban, and it was kind of raw data collected by the game managers. So it was not vetted in any statistical significant way. It was more about what they reported to the wildlife authorities. So yeah, what's happening after the hunting ban? Yeah, definitely going to be interesting. And we do have some anecdotal data, not anecdotal, but some data on one of the counties on damage post hunting ban. And we're trying to match that and trying to figure out whether things indeed change.
How does it look like? I'm very curious about that. I was.
Yeah, so actually, I just looked at the other day. It doesn't look very different actually. No, despite there's definitely there's a lot of literature out there that does say that a lot of damage are done by individual animals. Like they're like habituated animals that go in and do a slew of damage and they leave, or they get shot. And it seems like that's the case. I mean, the bulk of the damages seem to be in this, just by purely visual overlap. They seem to be in the same like red areas that we signaled, with a few other locations that did not occur before, which seem to be like single individuals kind of moving away from their from forested habitat. So this would be interesting, just because right now it's very politicized and very all over media, and you cannot turn on the TV in Romania without having a seeing something about bears right now, kind of on a daily basis, and most of the time pictured as like the menace of the plight of bears in Romania.
So now the perception is that there is a lot of more conflict.
The perception is that there's a lot more conflict, a lot more bears, which strangely also coincided with an uptick in social media posts and.
But you see also, sorry, you see also an increase in the number of reported damages after the hunting ban? Because you said that the spatial locations seem the same, but is there an increase in number?
So the data that we have, again, it's unfortunately hasn't been collected in the same rigor, just because the project or the initiative ended just in 2016. But so far, as we can tell, it's not necessarily an increase. I mean, it varies from year to year, as we see from the previous, from the 2008, 2016 data. So it's not like some sort of exponential increase in the number of damage just because the hunting ban was instated. There's a lot of debate right now whether indeed the population increased really greatly, and the damages increased concomitantly. There's no real data to back any of this up, unfortunately.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, Mihai can tell you more.
I would like to add something to what Viorel said. Also, we had expected a huge increase on conflicts after the ban, and it wasn't so big. I think it was somewhere between 10 to 20%. 20% being in the areas in which the local politician push people to report more than they used to. So it was in that area that we worked. In one county, practically the level of damage remained the same. And I think what is one weak point is that we started to collect data on conflicts very late in Romania. Since 2010, we had something like a system that is known by people and people start to report. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cover a larger area because not everybody is registering the location of the damage. So we have this gap in the system at national level. But the trend is positive. Also, since 2010 until today, so including also the ban time, it's increasing, but not so much. And we have difference by year by year. For example, in 2014, the conflicts were higher than in 2017 on the whole region. So the ban was between 2000. It was in 2016. Then we had 2018. It was lower. Then 2019 again higher. So it's changed. Also, we believe it's also depends on the crop, but unfortunately we don't have data on damage related to crops too much because we have also the wild boar. So it's for authorities it's difficult to differentiate it on crops. So we cannot relate our livestock damage with the crop damage intensity because wild boar it's overlapping with the bear. So well, sometimes if it's not raining outside, you cannot see what was the animal eating there. So it's more difficult.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a question related to that from Frank. It seems that your findings from Romania after the hunting ban supports the finding from Joe Northrup's study that hunting does not necessarily reduce conflict.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thanks for the question. I mean, not just based on not just the study, but in general, the research and work that we've been doing over the past 10 years, it seems like this is indeed the case. I mean, it is likely that after the hunting ban, given that 300-400 bears were removed each year from the Romanian population, and then when that stopped, it is likely that the bear population, went up to some extent, but that did not necessarily seem like it really drove crazy increases in damages especially to livestock. So hunting as a way to manage conflict, if that it's partially probably has to be accompanied by mitigation, as it's logically by mitigation measures, in towns, by guarding, increasing guard dogs and electric fences, reduce the likelihood of animals coming into town. So interestingly, the areas that were hunted the most in 2016 are still the ones that used to have the most damage. Not necessarily to livestock, but also animals coming into towns, and that continued after the hunting stopped. And this was because there was absolutely no mitigation measures to prevent that from happening. There's no garbage proof. Bear-proof garbage bins. There's illegal dumps everywhere. Supplemental feeding continued with quite high intensity, right in areas abutting.
I just sorry, Viorel. I just want to add something related to Frank's question. Now I was thinking that maybe the level of conflict, the number of incidents didn't increase after the ban, because somehow the increase in population has been compensated by the decision of the authorities to target as much as possible problem bears. So before we hunted like 400 bears per year randomly. After the ban, we hunted approximately 80 bears per year. Most of them were problem bear identified or in areas where problem occur intensively. So maybe if we will have the data, we could answer to this question. So increasing number of population, which might lead to increasing number of conflicts, might be compensated by a new system that is targeting the problem bears. It's not an answer, I think it's another question. Sorry, I just have to leave. I have to prepare for the live session. So thank you, everybody. See you
Thank
there.
you very much.
Bye.
Actually, I have to stop the recording, but we can still stay here and continue the discussion. I'm happy to do so. So thank you very much. Officially, I will stop the session, but everyone is welcome to stay and keep the discussion. And please, Frank, sorry that I interrupt you, but
no problem.